Welcome back to KMMHC, your choice for talk and mental health. Now, here's your host with the most empathy, that is, Eddie Jose Not Jesus Carrillo.
What would our AM station be? Like what number?
I got no idea. 1470 AM radio.
Does it go that high?
I think so. I never really listened to AM radio. I'm not sure.
That was a good intro. I like that.
I've been thinking about that one. I've been planning that one.
For the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. It's been a while.
Hell yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Like practicing on my ride to work every morning. Be like, welcome back to KMMHC.
I love it. Well, before we do anything else, before we say anything else, Justin hasn't talked about this yet on the show, but he finished his fellowship, which I think is a huge deal. So congrats to Dr. Justin. He's almost done with his exams or whatever the hell else you got to do as a medical doctor. If you're a lowly licensed therapist like myself, you just got to take one board exam and then do your licensure stuff and you're all good. But apparently as a doctor, you got to do like a bunch of shit after already doing a bunch of shit. So he's almost there.
Yeah, after 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, and 2 years of fellowship, I'm like, finally done.
You're really making the idea of becoming a psychiatrist just like super like, oh, that's not too bad. Just
Yeah.
what's the math on that?
It is the 13 years. Yeah, 13 years of post-high school education. It's crazy. It's a big, it's a long road. But it's important. And I think a lot of times in today's world, there are people that want to become doctors without actually having to go through the full thing. Or like a lot of like APPs or advanced practice practitioners that want to be called doctor and be treated like doctor, but they get a quarter of the education. But so if you want to really know your stuff, if you want to have the full education, it takes over a decade.
Yeah. Feels like you have some animosity towards those advanced practitioners.
No animosity whatsoever, because we have to work together. But
That's right.
Just it's like if you didn't go to med school, don't call yourself Dr. So-and-so, you know?
Yeah. It's a
fair.
different ballgame.
Yeah.
Well, except for like optometrists and dentists and stuff. We can call them doctor too.
That's true. Yeah. And they did 4 years of school. Yeah.
Yeah. We're just on a whole nother level today. Okay. Justin, what are we talking about today? What are we focusing on after we've rambled for 3 minutes and 40 seconds?
We are talking about drug addiction, and not your typical drug addiction episode where we talk about the signs and symptoms of drug intoxication and withdrawal and what the different drugs are and what to look out for. We're kind of talking more about the social and societal factors for drug addiction. So we'll jump right into our mindfulness question and say, what are some of the judgments your mind jumps to when talking about people with addiction?
Well, because of my extensive experience in the field and my high level of empathy, I'll just think about things that people will say about people who struggle with addiction. Maybe that they're like weak-minded, that they are addicts. Like people will call them, like they won't use strengths-based language or person-first language. They'll call people addicts. That they like aren't able to work. I don't know, things like that. Like they have no self-control. I think people when they discuss those who struggle with drug addiction or substance use, they're very judgmental. They can be very judgmental, and they don't think about how a person got there in the first place. They're really quick to just judge them on where they're at presently without thinking about how they got there.
Yeah, I agree. I would say I think a very similar thing. A lot of times when you hear people talking about addiction in society, it's their fault. It's an individual's problem.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily society's problem. It's all that individual. They made the choices. They made the mistakes. So that's what we're going to hopefully try and change your mind about today.
Yeah. I think too,
So,
like a lot of people will say like to just get help or like go to rehab. Like it's not that easy, right? Like it's
no.
I think Portland has a Portland area has a decent amount of substance use. Actually, you know what? Now that I say it out loud, it doesn't have a decent. Not because they're not doing enough, just because the need is so high. But they've had maybe a higher number of substance use supports that we could probably draw from. But still, it's still not enough. It's not that easy to get help like that.
Agreed. Yeah, and Portland's actually probably one of the best in the country in terms of actual resources, and it's still not nearly enough.
Yeah. There is a thing that's talked about where like Oregon is like last in terms of like mental health treatment, but I don't know what I don't actually, anytime anybody brings that up, I never ask to like read like based off of what. Is it based off of like availability of resources? Is it based off of clinicians, practitioners? Like what is it actually based off of? So someone might actually say we're the worst, but I guess just like just experience wise or like firsthand knowledge, it seems like there's, I don't know. I don't actually know what I'm trying to say. It seems like there's stuff out there. I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess I don't know what I would compare it to. Like if we're last, what does first place look like? You know what I mean? Like is the margins, are they razor thin? Are there big gaps in between each state? I don't know.
Yeah.
Something to think about. I should look into
So either they're best or they're last. There's
that.
you tune into KMMHC for non-black and white answers.
I mean, pretty much.
Yeah. Our favorite answer is it depends. So
That's right.
we wanted to talk about this topic because I actually just got off a rotation at an adolescent drug treatment center, and it was a really eye-opening experience for me. I really enjoyed working with a lot of those kids. It was a residential treatment center, and it taught me so much, and just the patients really taught me so much. Primarily just about what their lives were like, and the type of kid that gets into drugs to the point where they need to go to a drug treatment center. And so many of them had just such significant trauma histories that contributed to the substance use. And a lot of them had family issues or family substance issues that perpetuated into that next generation. So it really helped me understand that it's not just kids being like, I want to do drugs. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I've been through some really horrible things in my life. I'm looking for something to help try and get these thoughts out of my head, and drugs seem to be the only thing doing it, because a lot of those kids also didn't really have any trusted adults that could help them get through that issue.
Mm. The idea of trusted adults. It's such a huge like we don't, I don't want to say we don't think about it enough, but it's just the like recently the CDC, we've talked about it. CDC coming out with the report that just overall child and teen mental health is on the decline. And I was reading through it, and one of the things that it said was like a huge protective factor for kids was school connectedness,
Yeah.
connectedness to just their community of the school, connectedness to adults in the school. I know for us at my work, like we do I shouldn't say we, the counselors will do, because I don't have a part of it. That's why I want to say we. But the counselors will do, one of our counselors does we'll get like a survey, and we'll send it out every school year at the start. And in the counseling center survey, it asks specifically, like, do you feel like you have a trusted adult in the school? And then after it says yes or no, then they ask specifically, like, who are the trusted adults? And I know I've used the answers to that to see like what kids feel like I'm a trusted adult for them, and how can I
Hmm.
continue to work on those relationships, and then what can I do better so that maybe more kids can feel like I can be a trusted adult, right? Like I'm not like the school counselors where they get a specific part of the alphabet where like these are like I am assigned to you, right? I joke around and say like, you know, the counselors say, oh, you know, on freshman orientation day, they're like, oh, my alphabet's this to this and this to this, and then when it's my turn to introduce myself, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm alphabet A to Z. Like I get all the kids, I work with all of them. So it's
Yeah.
like trying to use that information, because we know how important it is to have a trusted adult, to be connected to school. Huge protective factors for kids, for things like developing symptoms of depression, anxiety, for helping to stop kids not turn to substances when they are struggling.
You are so right. Thank you for that, because it's such a big point. And that's one thing I
Yeah.
learned, especially from my perspective of privilege. I come from a family with two parents who are still married and who are both very responsible. My parents were very, I mean, they're both college educated, both 4-year graduate degree, and a lot of kids don't have that. They don't have a parent who is loving, respecting, understanding, listening, So it helps me understand that trusted adult is so important. So on this episode today, we want to not focus on necessarily the individual aspects of drug use, but more the societal factors. Yes, it is important to have personal responsibility if you do have a drug addiction and you want to overcome it. But yeah, we want to focus on the societal stuff of why people turn to drugs in the first place. And our goal is to try and help you see why so many people are struggling with addiction in our society, in the US and in the world. So give me a story, Eddie.
I was thinking like in the context of like looking at over maybe like societal themes and yeah, just things in our probably our culture around substance use. This is a thing I've thought about over the last few years. Specifically, our mutual friend Ryan, like I spend a lot of time with him. We live so close together, and we talk a decent amount just about like drinking, like at our age, like if that's something that we want to do anymore, or even like partake in. He sent me like a Twitter thread like a few months ago about a guy who basically just had this long thread of tweets just talking about how alcohol use is just so normalized in our culture, in our society, that for him when he started to step away from drinking, that it felt weird at first and it felt
Yeah.
like I'm doing something wrong. But then to see on the other side, like, okay, once I've had an extended period of time without drinking, just seeing how much there was improvements for him. And he couldn't remember if they were someone that drank a lot, but I know for me personally, like I've pretty much stopped drinking for the most part since about like December of last year. Here and there I'll drink. Like I know when we went on our trip to Japan, I drank, and recently went to the Cruise Factory. Like that was fun. Like I drank a little bit, had to. It's from the source.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like really since Christmas Day of 2022, like I really haven't drank that much. And I remember, and I've told Ryan this, and I remember thinking like there was a point in time a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, where I was thinking like we were in grad school. I mean, you were there for part of it, Justin. Like we
Mm-hmm.
would go out and party and have a good time and drink too much, and it just felt like a regular part of our life, and that was just what people our age would do. And I remember thinking maybe a little bit after I graduated, thinking like, how am I going to keep doing this? Like, how am I going to like drink a lot on the weekend and like function? Like, it's going to get a lot harder. And am I still going to want to do these things? Like, I don't know. So I know for me there was a little part where I was actually like worried, like am I gonna have to keep up with people and keep up with friends as I get older about like drinking this much? Am I gonna lose friends because I don't want to drink anymore? And I think those concerns were realistic only because I didn't know any better, but not realistic in the sense of like my friends would not want to be my friends anymore because I didn't drink. And I think that just speaks to like how normalized drinking is in our culture and our society. Binge drinking as a college student is like pretty much the norm.
Mm-hmm.
There's on TikTok there's like it's called a Borg. Have you heard of those?
No.
So a lot of college kids, I don't shouldn't say a lot, but I've seen college kids drink this thing. I sound old when I say that. They'll get like a gallon of water, and then they will like dump out half of it or part of it and then fill it back up with like tequila or vodka, and then they'll put like two liquid IVs and then like some water flavor enhancer, and then just drink that because it's like it'll help keep you hydrated while you drink. And Borg stands for like blackout rage gallon. But yeah, it's just it's drinking is just like such a normal thing in our society, and there's nothing bad about engaging here and there and in moderation. But yeah, I guess to wrap up my point, just where I was at with alcohol, especially in last part of undergrad and grad school, moving into adulthood, and where I'm at now, where I'm just basically like, it's just to me, it's not worth it. I feel like I get hangovers super easy now. I don't like to have a shitty night's sleep after I drink. Like, yeah, my perspective has changed a lot, but I know my perspective was influenced because of our societal norms around drinking.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing. And I'll
Yeah,
agree. It seems like when I talk to the older generation, like my parents and their friends, they tell me, you guys, your generation drinks a lot. You drink a lot more than we
yeah,
used to. I find that so fascinating that it really has become so much more normalized. And A lot of it is corporate and societal pressures of, oh, you should go out and drink for brunch, you should day drink, you should, there's so much
Mm,
pressure from all
yeah.
these companies trying to make you drink all their products to drink more and more and more and more and more. So it's a little scary, and I worry about our generation and our dependency on drinking, because I think it, in a lot of ways, is our main coping mechanism for dealing with stress, and that's not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But in terms of story time, I think I've touched on it a little bit in the past, but when I was 19, I went through a pretty bad breakup where I was actually living with my girlfriend and even looking
Mm,
for wedding rings at the time. But it ended abruptly. And one of my main mechanisms for coping with it was smoking a lot of marijuana. I had a friend
mm,
who I was hanging out with a lot who did it frequently, and I fell into that trap. It was a way to deal with that pain. I was looking for an
mm.
escape, and I found it in a substance. And luckily, I've got all the support in the world from my friends and family. I had other coping mechanisms that I could use too that also helped me get through that time. So it never really became a big problem in my life. It never really got in the way of my career, my relationships. And I believe that it didn't become a problem because I had all that support from friends and family. But I could easily see how something like that, a big life event, can lead to addiction if you don't have that support, if you don't have that other coping mechanisms, if that is your only way of coping, how you can really fall into that trap.
Yeah. And I think too, like I was thinking about it as you were sharing, you were 19, and I think about like the kids that I see on a daily basis, like even at 19, like your frontal lobe isn't there for you to understand like
Yeah.
yep, I'm gonna smoke because I feel bad, and when I smoke, I feel better. Really, it's not that at all. It's just when you smoke or when you engage in whatever, you're just numb now, and you can't like have any like real thoughts to deal with it in the moment, and then you just deal with it later, and then you do it again. And yeah, I mean, why wouldn't our kids think that this is a helpful thing to do if they just don't know any better?
Yeah, bingo. And that's what they say when I talk to them. A lot of the kids at the drug treatment center, they're like, "I feel bad. This, smoking helps me feel better, so why wouldn't I do it?"
Hmm.
It's like, you
Yeah.
give me medicine for depression and anxiety, isn't that the same thing? And it's like,
Mm.
that's decent logic. It's
Yeah.
very similar, yeah, but it's a little bit
Yeah.
different because the medicines we give you aren't typically intoxicants, and so that's
Hmm.
that's that's generally my response back to them. But yeah, their logic is there. They're looking for something that's going to make them feel a little better in the moment.
Yeah. Kids are not dumb. Like the
Yeah,
kids, teens, like these, they know what they're talking about. Like they've been saying some shit sometimes, but they're not dumb.
really
They can string together thoughts, yeah, and reason.
cuts to the core of you. You're like, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So some
Uh,
stats and facts for you today. So remember, there are about 330 million people in the United States of America, just to give you a scope of some of these. But according to healthandhumanservices.gov, in 2021, 61.2 million people, so that's about 21% of the
mhm.
population, used illicit substances. 9.2 million misused opioids, so using them more than prescribed or using them to get high, intoxicated. 46.3 million Americans met criteria for a substance use disorder based on DSM 5
Whew.
criteria. That's so many.
Yeah.
46.3 million Americans had a diagnosable substance use uh, 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 disorder. That really
Yeah.
struck me.
Yeah. Well, and then think about how many could meet the criteria and then how many are getting treatment. It's not 46.3 million.
Yes,
Um,
which brings us to our next stat of 94% of people with a substance use disorder did not get treatment. That
mm,
is mind blowing to me. 94%. So I think a big part of that is the societal stigma around drug use. It's seen as not a mental health problem. It's seen as an individual problem, as a character problem. And
mhm.
so that's why we wanted to have this episode today, to maybe try and shift that focus in a little bit in some people.
Yeah. I think too the like barrier to treatment is really hard too. Like I know we've talked about insurance a lot here. So like how much insurance will cover substance use treatment, that's a big issue. Um, if you look at like I'm someone who definitely like if I was homesick, I'd be watching like we've talked about it, like the Maury show and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But in between they'd have the commercials related to like getting treatment, and you like end up looking up these places and they're like tens of thousands of dollars for treatment. It's like who's got cash to burn like that? There's that one commercial, I can't remember what it was called, but it's like the guys that they're interviewing is like the owner or like someone high up in the company, and he's like, it's so like, he's like, this place works. I should know. I was an addict for 10 years. Now I'm not. Like that, who's that gonna convince?
It does though. It does convince people. Like if that
That's fair.
commercial hits 1 million people and only 2 people think, "Oh, that could help me," and those 2 people spend $20,000 at that place makes a profit.
That's
It's
true. Who was it? I don't think I ever watched it, but is it John Oliver? That's a guy, right? That's famous and
yeah.
does the talk show stuff. Yeah. I think he did a thing on like these like substance use treatment, right? Didn't he do like an
He
episode on
did.
it and he
It was
kind of
really
just shit
good.
on him?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember like what was the key points of that?
Key points were that there are a ton of these programs. A lot of them are not really federally regulated and just
Yeah.
kind of do whatever they want. They base their treatment on stuff maybe that worked for other people in the past, but they're not necessarily evidence based. A lot of them
Yeah.
don't really want you to get better so that you can keep coming back and paying
Mhm.
for their programs. So it's an industry
Yeah.
that is rife with a lot of corruption and corporate greed.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, if they don't take insurance and it's all private pay, they don't have to use evidence-based stuff, right? Like they don't have to report back to anybody to be like, hey, like we use blah blah blah, patient and this writer discussed like they don't have to do any of that. They can
Yeah.
just like do whatever they want. Damn, yeah. I remember now. It's coming back to me. I never
Hmm.
watched it, but it was definitely maybe I'll watch it today after this.
Yeah,
Hold
it
me
was.
accountable. If I don't watch it, yeah.
I'll send you a text. Hey,
Remind me.
watch John Oliver.
Perfect. So
So,
to the point that Justin was saying earlier, I'll cut in front of you, Justin. The way we look at drug addiction as a society is really important. We have largely been told that drug addiction is a problem with a person's character or individual choices, their values, they're a bad person if they engage in drug addiction, all things that are just not true. We've also been told that drug use is largely a criminal problem and not a mental health problem, which is why 1 in 5 people that are incarcerated in America are there for a drug charge, according to the Prison Policy Initiative. And we can probably do a whole episode on how fucked up all that is.
yeah.
Um, but it's also important to know that not all countries treat drug use the way that we do in the US. So, for example, Portugal in the year 2000, they decriminalized all illicit substances. That has happened. I always feel like I misspeak on this, but that's happened here in Oregon too, where
Hmm.
they've like decriminalized. I don't know if it's all, but like they've decriminalized some. And the thing that's come up with that is a lot of people are now saying like, well, everything's legal now. You can do whatever. That's why we have all these this and that and that but like that's not necessarily the case, and people are not really understanding what does it mean when substance use or certain substances are decriminalized. So
Hmm.
I could try to describe it and I'll probably butcher it, but I know someone who could do a good job at describing it, so I'm going to pass it off to my friend over here, Justin, so he can tell us.
Well, I think you make a great point, though. If you decriminalize heroin tomorrow, it's not like I'm going to be like, oh, yes, finally, it's my chance to go do some heroin. And
I'm
kids,
just
like we
trying to
said,
imagine that.
I know, right? It's like we were saying
Yeah.
earlier, kids aren't dumb. Kids are smart. They know that there are risks associated with these things. And a lot of kids, they know that
Mhm.
if even if these things are legal, they're not just going to jump on the bandwagon and be like, "Oh yeah, I got to go try meth. I got to go try heroin."
Yeah.
So, decriminalization doesn't mean legalization necessarily. So a lot of these places that have
Mhm.
decriminalized it, you can still pay fines if you're caught with it. That you can't deal it, you can't make these drugs and sell them in mass quantities.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you're caught with them, especially in Portugal, if you get caught with these drugs, they offer you like drug treatment health and programs, which is, I
Mhm.
think, the way you should be doing it. And that's more of a public health approach, not a
Yeah.
criminal approach. You don't just throw someone in prison so that when they get out, they go right back to doing the same drugs again, and there's zero rehabilitation that happens in prison.
Mhm.
And then I really tried to find, there's a lot of mixed messages about what happened in Portugal because we have 23 years of research after this happened in the year 2000. Some sources say, oh, it was the most amazing thing that ever happened. Some say, oh, it was the worst thing that ever happened. But I looked on the United Nations website, which I felt was probably one of the more neutral sources. And some of the objective facts are that drug use rates in Portugal are now below the European Union average. So they have less drug use than other countries that have it criminalized. Drug use declined in young people aged 15 to 24 years old, and problematic drug use, like IV drug use, went down. There were some other statistics, and they're kind of nebulous, that maybe some certain things got worse, but it seems like overall things got better in Portugal because of the decriminalization of drugs there. And yeah, I'm curious to see what happens in Oregon in terms of what actually happens to the drug use population, because I know in Portland there's a lot of heroin, there's a lot of meth, there's a lot of drug use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious too, because I think people are so quick to like, oh, no one gets in trouble anymore. Like, that's not true. Like, people get in trouble all the time. Like, it's not like it. I'm trying to be neutral. I'm trying to be good. Hold on. Let me gather my thoughts.
I appreciate your second.
There's just like a certain grouping of thought, of groupthink, that just assumes because like now people are being put first that means people are just going to take advantage of everything. Like why are we always assuming, not we, why are some people always assuming that because things are changed in a certain direction or more lenience is given that people are just inherently going to take advantage of it? I gave when I gave a training a couple weeks ago to classified staff in our district, I shared this TED talk that a student actually from our school district gave a few years ago, and she talked about the importance of mental health days in school. And she shared how she was actually part of the group of people that helped put legislation through that now makes like mental health days legal in Oregon. And a lot of people's first reaction is, well, kids are just going to take advantage of it. Are they? Maybe. Take 10 kids. Maybe one of them does. Who cares?
Yeah.
9 kids got an opportunity to take a mental health day that they needed and they didn't get penalized for it. Like, I don't know. I think I'm a little off topic with the mental health days and kids in school, but I think the basic point I'm trying to make is still there, that like unfortunately what ends up happening when we try to be more lenient with people, or we try to maybe shift away from being, is it punitive, is that the right word to use, when we shift away from like punishing, or shift away from having consequences, that we're just immediately saying like, okay, go ahead, it's free, willy-nilly, do whatever the hell you want. Well, that's not the case at all. We're trying to shift the way that things have been done, because obviously they're not working. If the way things have been done forever had been working, we wouldn't have whatever issues that there are out there, right? Like things would be different, but they're not. So it's like we got to try something drastically different to see if we get a better result. Anyway.
I love that point. Oh, I think you made a great point. It's like, how is our system working for us? Maybe we should rethink this a little bit. But hey, Eddie, it's time to play our favorite game, which I like to call Which Country's the Worst? When we try to decide which country has the worst drug use in the entire world. So, Eddie, without looking at the show notes here, our little script, which country do you think has the worst drug use in the entire world?
I already looked at it, man. I can't even pretend to be like, is it the U.S.?
Ding, 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 ding. Yes, it is the United States of America has the worst drug addiction problems in the entire world, with a total of 6.7 life years of productivity per person lost due to substance addiction. So we got a problem with this in this country. And I think that's a statistic we're not talking about too much. And this is according to the worldpopulationreview.com, which actually seemed like a pretty scientific website where they were trying to actually find out the life years of productivity lost per person. But yeah, the United States is really struggling. I think And just to give you a perspective, it's the US, and then the next 9 are Estonia, Scotland, Belarus, Mongolia, Canada, Greenland, Russia, Kazakhstan, and the United Arab Emirates. So just to give you an idea of some of the countries that have the worst substance use in the world. And yeah, America is number 1. Booyah, America. We won. We did it.
All I saw, that's right. All I saw is we're number 1, baby.
USA.
Yesterday was the 4th of July.
USA.
Yep. We're celebrating. Let me tell you. I tell you what. Sorry.
So how are societal views and our capitalism contributes to the drug problem is really important. And I think I'm going to name the title after this episode something along the lines of like how capitalism creates drug use or something like that. You know, I've still got to work the kinks out a little bit.
Yep.
But there are that in this country, we are seen, or we are told to see drug use as an individualized problem. And a lot of times it is a societal and capitalist problem. So drug companies pushed a lot of lies about the dangers of opioid use and made billions and billions of dollars getting people addicted to their pills. So according to a 2022 article from NPR, the Sackler family, who owns Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin, made over $10 billion on the opioid epidemic. And remember, at the peak of the opioid epidemic in 2021, 106,000 people died from opioid overdoses in 1 year. And that's just what was reported. So the Sacklers literally made a killing on selling drug addiction. And that's just sickening to me.
Yeah. You know, it's been interesting listening to bits and pieces over like the last couple years of updates on the Sackler family and then like getting in trouble kind of, but like not really getting in trouble. But I think the last update I've heard on it, and this is probably like a month and a half ago, is basically that like none of the like living Sackler people are really going to get in any trouble. And they're pretty much just going to like to get a slap on the wrist of just knowing that like they're shitty people and like that's kind of it, and they're just gonna like pay out some people, and it's really not a lot, and it really sucks, and it's I mean it's kind of why we're at where we're at today with things like opioids, with things like fentanyl. People get addicted to opioids and need something maybe a little stronger. It's not working for them anymore. You go through is it synthetic? Is that the word I want? Like the man-made, scientifically made stuff. It's fucked up. The Sackler family, everything that they did.
The fact that if you murder someone in the streets, you go to prison for life. But if you kill a genocidal amount of people with pills that you're pushing on the American people, you have to pay a fine and you're good to go. That just blows my mind.
Yeah. And the fine is like not even a dent in their wealth. Like it's peanuts. Anyway. Yeah. Another point is that the prison industrial complex wanting more people in prison and lobbying for harsher drug penalties. I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier too, of just like people expecting that if you have an issue that is detrimental to me or it looks negative to me, that you deserve a punishment. According to prisonlegalnews.org, the private prison industry has given over $6 million to political campaigns of state politicians since the year 2000. And this is primarily through political action committees. It's definitely interesting to see or to hear about how many politicians have like private prisons like in their pockets. That part is fucked up too.
Agreed. Yeah. The fact that an industry can donate to someone's campaign and change their policies when they're elected is just wild to me, that we let that happen in this country. Like, you don't see how that is just going to breed corruption. It just blows my mind that we let this happen. It happens right under our noses all the time. And another point that we wanted to make is that in general, workers are just pushed too hard and not really paid enough to provide for their basic needs. The wealth gap in this country has increased tremendously, particularly since the 1970s, after we started getting rid of unions, which really helped protect people and their livelihoods. So the wealthy are getting a lot more prosperity, and the middle class is pretty much dying. Even though that since the 70s, our economy has grown tremendously. We are the richest country in the history of the world. And still, we have a child poverty rate that is twice that of other industrial countries. It's like, why? Why is that? Why do we let all these people just rake in the money at the top while a lot of people at bottom are truly suffering? And so I think the great resignation, what happened during the middle of COVID when people are quitting their jobs, was a big clue that people were just sick and tired of being overworked. The emphasis in this country on productivity is just kind of unhealthy. We value work and productivity above all else, and other people's mental health really struggles and suffers because of this. And we found some papers that showed that one of the main reasons people used methamphetamine was actually because they wanted more energy and productivity, which I actually encountered a decent amount in adult psychiatry. I've met a decent amount of people that would just recreationally use meth. They'd be like, I needed to get a lot of stuff done. I didn't have a lot of time to do it, so I would use a little bit of meth and crank out a bunch of work all night, and bada bing, bada boom, functional drug addiction.
Yeah. There was actually I watched a Drugs Inc. episode years ago about meth specifically, and they said someone because they were going to different parts of the country, one of the people or a couple of the people that were being interviewed were from the Bay Area, and honestly, I'm pretty sure one of the people who was like being interviewed, who was at the time homeless, was like not far from where I live. Like they were in Milpitas. Like
Yeah.
I recognized like the buildings in the back. But they specifically said if meth was more widely accepted, you would hear about way more tech bros or techies that use meth recreationally, or I guess for productivity reasons, because of how much they need to like get a bunch of work done and work all night and like meet these crazy deadlines that tech companies have. So I mean, yeah, cocaine is definitely a stimulant that people talk about and actually probably more correlate with like being rich and being successful, whereas meth is not like that at all. But it sounds like a lot of people actually do use meth to for similar reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And we bring up these issues because we want, as mental health professionals, we want to help people. And our country overall is pretty sick. Our mental health is getting a lot worse. Yeah. We're overworked. It feels like a lot of times the systems in place that are here to protect us aren't really protecting us. So I think overall we got to rethink some of these structures, rethink some of these systems, because our mental health is just declining, and I really hope we can turn it around within our lifetimes. But unfortunately, there's a lot of inertia pushing us in this same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving to discussion questions. The first one, Justin, you talked a little bit about your recent rotation in a residential substance use program. But in the patients you've worked with, why do you see people getting addicted to drugs? How does this all come about?
So many reasons. I'd say like if there's one reason that I could pinpoint probably has the most is childhood trauma, ACEs, adverse childhood events. A lot of kids go through some really, really horrible things in this world, and they don't really have any coping mechanisms to deal with it, especially if their parents are also struggling with substance use, and parents don't really have any healthy coping mechanisms and ways to model appropriate behavior to these kids. So a lot of them turn to drugs to just, man, if you've been physically abused and you just want these thoughts out of your head, why wouldn't you drink? Why wouldn't you try and drown them out?
Yeah. Yeah, I think trauma ends up being like one of the number one things that like is a precursor to a lot of the mental health disorders that we talk about. In the training that I did recently with the staff, just kind of trying to reinforce the importance of understanding and being open to the idea that unfortunately a lot of our kids have been through some messed up things, and there's a reason why the issues that they're having are there in the first place. If you want to hear a little more just about trauma informed care, we did an episode on that. think it was pretty good. So feel free to check it out. It's just really trauma-informed care. The idea of just being open and receptive to the negative experiences that our clients and patients might have been impacted by can really just help shape how we treat the people that we work with.
Nice. And our last discussion question for the day, because we'll wrap it up pretty quick here, is how are the resources in your area? Do you find it's hard to get people connected to substance use stuff? What are people's reactions to trying to get there?
Yeah. I mean, I've gone back and forth, I think, just in this episode of where are we? I think I think there's more clinicians. I think there's more practitioners. I think getting people connected. We talked about it. I think in the last episode, maybe the episode before that, where just getting people connected can be really hard because it is intimidating. It is scary. For someone like me who like has an idea of the system, maybe it doesn't seem as hard or intimidating. But for someone who's just like told, "Hey, you need help," or "Hey, your kid needs help, go find them help," that could be really hard and intimidating. So I think the correct answer is probably there's just not enough. Um, and really, I don't have a good idea off the top of my head to fix that. But the biggest thing I can control is just trying to get as many help and resources available to the kids and teens that I come in contact with, in my work, similar to what you're doing, Justin, of just like having these ideas in mind and trying to be able to bridge some of those gaps as best possible.
Yeah. And then from my perspective, I know I just moved away from Omaha, the Nebraska area, but where I did my residency and fellowship training, yeah, there was one child and adolescent inpatient treatment drug program. One. And
Yeah.
it serviced pretty much the entire eastern half of Nebraska. And, there were 20 beds. That's it. For all these kids that have all these problems. And they were so inundated with referrals that they had to change it to, you had to be court ordered to go there. That was the only way you could actually get in. So I would have parents coming up to me of some of my patients being like, I need to get my kid treatment. If they're outpatient, they're just going to keep using. They need to be somewhere where they have to stay. And I literally had to tell them, there is nothing. Unless your child gets into major legal trouble first, there is nothing in the area. And even for adults, it was really hard to get them into drug treatment or drug and alcohol treatment programs. It was literally, I hated having this conversation because the conversation has to start with, do you have insurance? Because there was one program in Omaha that would take people without insurance. And of course, they were packed all the time. Yeah. So you can see why 94% of the people with substance use disorders never get help, because the resources suck, they're overcrowded, they're overpopulated, and there's so much societal stigma saying, you should figure this out because it's your fault, it's your problem, and you don't need anyone's help. You need to figure it out on your own.
Yeah. Oh, I heard that a lot.
I know. Yeah. It kind of stinks.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Well, we will wrap up with some celebrities because I know that we always like to tell you which celebrities have struggled with these things. But Robert Downey Jr., to start out with, he was Iron Man. At one point in his life, he was addicted to alcohol, cocaine, heroin. And according to WebMD, he started using drugs at 8 years old, which is pretty wild. That is very early. And some good quotes that he had, and this is according to AZ Quotes. I love this quote. I don't drink these days. I'm allergic to alcohol and narcotics. I break out in handcuffs. I thought that was pretty funny.
That's good.
And then I'll just take out that next one. We don't need that one. If you want to give... You feel comfortable talking about The Weeknd?
Yeah. I hope so. Next up, we have The Weeknd, the musical artist. His actual name is Abel Tesfaye. He's used in the past ketamine, cocaine, MDMA, mushrooms, and cough syrup. He moved out of his mother's house in Toronto to live with a friend when they were younger, and they would steal from supermarkets to buy drugs and alcohol. He has stated that sometimes he will use drugs to help overcome writer's block. I know that's like a I feel like that's a pretty well-known thing as far as people who are fans of The Weeknd. Like, oh, this is like different types of music will come out and be like, oh, he must have been like under the influence when he was doing this, or oh, The Weeknd's back, or he's back to where he's at, and like that kind of sucks because I feel like there's almost a pressure on him to like come out with certain types of music, which then in turn means he needs to be high to make certain kinds of music, and I think that's got to be a lot of shitty pressure to be
Yeah.
under. Um, when he was asked if he ever sought out treatment, he said no, definitely not. I think that's more when you're privileged, going to a therapist to something you do when you're growing up as a street kid in Toronto. And then he finished with, "Sorry, bro."
Yeah, I thought that was a good line because he really explained the stigma right there. He said you don't
Hmm.
get treatment unless you're privileged. And that sucks.
Yeah,
That sucks. And I think a lot of young
yeah,
people feel that way.
yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
even along the lines of drugs and creativity, I was just talking with my brother and he was like, "Yeah, I went through a big Red Hot Chili Peppers phase. Yeah, but I only really liked their stuff when the lead singer was doing a bunch of heroin." I'm just
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, I don't blame you."
Oh, yeah.
It's I think a lot of artists use drugs to try and explore those different depths of their lives and personalities. And last but
Yeah.
certainly not least, I know we spoke about her on the show a couple of months ago, but Hayden Panettiere, she was the actor that was super popular on the hit show Heroes in the early 2000s, but, open quote, fell off the face of the earth largely because of her addiction problems. She was in an abusive
Mm.
relationship, which also contributed to her career kind of stopping abruptly. She became addicted to alcohol and to opioids. Thank you, Sackler family. And she first used drugs at 15. She was told that they were peppy pills, which actually sounds really similar to Judy
Mm.
Garland, who did Wizard of Oz. She was pretty much given a lot of amphetamines while
Oh yeah.
filming Wizard of Oz to make sure she could work crazy hours. And in
Yeah.
2018, Hayden Panettiere came out and said that she was admitted to the hospital with jaundice and was told that if she did not get her alcohol and addiction issues under control, her liver was going to give out. So she checked into rehab for 8 months. And
Holy
she had
shit.
a really good quote that said, like, "I was on top of the world and I ruined it." So you can see how she internalized the societal view of it was her fault. It wasn't the industry's fault who spit her up and chew her out. It wasn't the Sackler family's fault for pumping all these pills onto the American people. She felt like it was her fault.
Damn. I just made the connection that Hayden. Did I bring this up last time? That she was in Remember the Titans?
Uh, she was a little, she was a really tiny young
She was
girl.
the little girl.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. So that makes me think too how I just finished Jeanette McCurdy's book, the
Oh
one
yeah.
I'm glad my mom died, and just how like I've heard a lot of like child actors of like how messed up it can be,
Hmm.
especially if you have like overbearing parents. But there's like got to be something out there where like your the chances that something bad happens or like your life being messed up a little bit because of like childhood acting, it's got to be pretty high. The rates of just like drug addiction or whatever other issue. Yeah, it's random connection now that I'm thinking about it. Really good book though. If you haven't read it yet, reading Jeanette
Yeah.
McCurdy's story.
I bet.
Um, yeah. Well, thank you all for listening. We hope that we can at least help shift your thinking in some way, shape, or form when it comes to substance use addiction. It's not the individual issue that I think society makes it out to be. It's not all of someone's fault if they're struggling. There's a lot more that goes into it. So we hope that we can at least help shift your thinking, or at least give you some new ideas to think about. You don't have to change your thinking just because we said something. As we wrap up today, we want to remind you you can find all of our episodes, even the first ones, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you use Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a 5-star review, and you can leave us a comment that we can read later. If you use Spotify, you can also leave us a 5-star review. We'd love to see those numbers go up. You can find us on social media at Millennial MHC on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you at the next episode. And as always, take care of y'all mentals.